The stagecoach left her at the crossroads with dust in her mouth and doubt in her chest. Eliza Warren stepped down onto ground so hard it could have been hammered iron, her worn boots meeting earth that hadn't seen rain in what looked like months. The driver barely glanced at her as he tossed her trunk down, a pitiful thing held together with rope and prayers, and without a word of farewell, he snapped the reins and left her standing in a cloud of prairie dust. She watched the coach disappear into the heat shimmer, carrying with it the last connection to everything she'd known. The last town. The last familiar face, the last echo of the woman she used to be. That woman was dead now, buried under a mountain of debt, betrayal, and broken promises. What stood here, squinting against the brutal afternoon sun, was something harder, something that had survived when survival seemed impossible. Eliza turned toward the horizon where Blackwood Ranch supposedly waited. The agent in Denver had made it sound like an opportunity, a position for a ranch cook, room and board included, wages fair for the frontier. What he hadn't mentioned was that 3 women had already quit in the past 6 months. What he hadn't said was that the ranch was so remote it might as well have been on the moon. What he'd carefully avoided was any description of Cole Braddock, the man who owned it. She'd find all that out soon enough. The walk from the crossroads took 2 hours, each step a negotiation between her pride and her blistered feet. Her black mourning dress, the only decent thing she owned, clung to her like a second skin, soaked through with sweat and dust until it looked more brown than black. She'd stopped wearing the veil weeks ago. There was no one left to mourn for, and the performance of grief had grown too heavy to carry. The ranch appeared gradually, emerging from the landscape like something reluctant to be seen. First the fence lines, weathered and functional, then the outbuildings, a barn that had seen better decades, a bunkhouse with smoke rising thin from its chimney, storage sheds that leaned slightly as if tired of standing, and finally the main house itself, a 2-story structure of timber and stone that looked like it had been built to withstand sieges rather than provide comfort. No flower boxes, no curtains in the windows, no sign that a woman had ever lived here or ever would. Eliza paused at the main gate, her hand resting on the rough-hewn post. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from the walk, but from the crushing weight of this being her last option. If this didn't work, there was nothing else. No family to return to, no friends who'd take her in, no money for another stagecoach ticket to another false hope. This was it. She pushed the gate open and walked through. 3 men were working near the barn, their movements efficient and economical in the heat. They noticed her immediately. She could feel their attention shift like a physical thing, but none of them stopped working. One was shoeing a horse, another mending tack, the third hauling water. They watched her approach with the kind of guarded curiosity reserved for strangers in trouble, often the same thing. Eliza kept her chin up and her stride steady. She'd learned early that the frontier respected confidence more than beauty, strength more than charm. These men would be looking for any sign of weakness, any hint that she'd fold at the first challenge. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "I'm looking for Cole Braddock," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard without being shrill. "I'm the new cook." The man with the horse, young, maybe 20, with sun-bleached hair, let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Another one?" "James." The voice came from the barn's shadow, low and sharp as a knife. "Get back to work." The young man's smirk vanished. He ducked his head and returned to the horse's hoof. A figure emerged from the barn's interior, backlit by the darkness behind him, so that for a moment he was nothing but a silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of certainty that came from owning everything in sight. Cole Braddock stepped into the light, and Eliza got her first real look at the man whose ranch would either save her or break her. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, she guessed, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same hard stone as his house. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been used to split wood, and eyes the color of winter sky, pale, cold, and assessing. He wore his work clothes like armor, canvas trousers, a faded shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard ground. Everything about him said this was a man who'd forgotten how to be soft, if he'd ever known in the first place. He looked her over with the same expression he might have used to evaluate livestock, clinical, thorough, utterly without warmth. You're late, he said finally. Agent said you'd be here 3 days ago. Stage broke an axle outside of Bennington, Eliza replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. I walked the last 2 miles. I'm here now. 3 women before you couldn't handle it here. What makes you different? The question hung between them like a challenge. Eliza could feel the other men pretending not to listen, their attention focused on their tasks while their ears tracked every word. I don't have anywhere else to go, she said, and the brutal honesty of it seemed to surprise him. That makes me motivated. And I don't quit. Something flickered in those cold eyes. Not quite approval, but perhaps recognition. He'd understand desperation. A man who built a ranch in the middle of nowhere, who surrounded himself with silence and distance, would know something about having nowhere else to go. You can cook? He asked. Yes. Bread, stew, beans, bacon, coffee that won't strip paint? Yes. You ever cooked for 12 men working 16-hour days in heat that'd kill a mule? No, she admitted. But I learn fast, and I don't waste food or time. He studied her for another long moment, and Eliza had the uncomfortable sensation of being read like a book. Her exhaustion, her desperation, the steel core of determination that was the only thing keeping her upright. Room and board, he said finally. $20 a month. You cook 3 meals a day, keep the house clean, and mind your own business. You don't gossip with the hands. You don't cause drama. You don't make problems. If you can't handle it, you leave. I'll pay your stage fare back to Denver, but that's it. One chance. Understood? Understood. Kitchen's through the main house. You'll have your own room upstairs, second door on the right. Breakfast is at 5, lunch at noon, dinner at 7. Men'll eat whatever you put in front of them, but they'll respect you more if it's good. Your first meal is dinner tonight. Don't be late. He turned to walk away, then paused and glanced back at her. And Mrs. Warren? Yes? The last cook quit after she set the kitchen on fire trying to manage the stove. The one before that left after 2 weeks saying the silence here drove her mad. The one before that ran off with one of the hands. His expression didn't change, but there was something like grim humor in his voice. Try not to do any of those things. Then he was gone, striding back toward the barn with the air of a man who'd said all he intended to say. Eliza stood in the yard for a moment, absorbing the weight of what she'd just agreed to. 12 men, 3 meals a day. A stove that apparently had a grudge against its operators, and a boss who looked at her like she was already halfway to failure. Ma'am? She turned. The young man, James, had abandoned the horse and approached her with something like sympathy in his eyes. I'll show you to the kitchen, he said. Fair warning, the stove's a beast. Got a temper worse than Cole's, and that's saying something. Eliza picked up her trunk, surprised when James immediately took it from her hands. I can carry it myself, she said. Didn't say you couldn't, he replied with a ghost of a smile. But Mama raised me not to watch a lady struggle when I got 2 good arms. She followed him toward the main house, aware of the other men's eyes tracking their movement. The afternoon sun beat down like a physical weight, and the dust from the yard coated her throat with every breath. The house's interior was somehow exactly what she'd expected, functional to the point of being austere. The main room held a large table with benches, scarred and worn from years of use. The walls were bare except for a few hooks for coats and hats. No decorations, no photographs, no sign that anyone cared about this space beyond its utility. James led her through to the kitchen, and Eliza's heart sank. The room was a disaster. Not dirty, exactly. Someone had made an effort to clean up. But chaotic. Pots hung at random angles. Supplies were shoved onto shelves without any organization. The counter was scarred and stained, and dominating the space like a cast-iron monument to suffering was the stove, a massive ancient beast that looked like it predated the ranch itself. That's Big Bertha, James said, setting her trunk down. She's temperamental. Does she work? Oh, she works, just takes some convincing. And you gotta know her moods. Feed her too much wood, she'll smoke you out. Not enough. She'll die on you right when you need her most. And whatever you do, don't open the oven door while she's hot, unless you want your eyebrows singed off. Eliza approached the stove like it might bite her. Up close, it was even more intimidating, covered in soot, with a door that hung slightly crooked and vents that whistled when the wind blew. How did the last cook set the fire? She asked. Grease, James said. Got it too hot trying to fry bacon for all the men at once. Whole pan went up. She panicked, threw water on it, which you never do with grease fires, as we all learned, and next thing we knew, the curtains caught. We got it out, but she was gone on the next stage. There's no curtains now. Yeah, well, Cole decided they were unnecessary. Eliza turned in a slow circle, taking inventory. She had maybe 3 hours before she was expected to feed 12 hungry men. She'd need to figure out what supplies were available, get that monster stove working, and somehow produce a meal that wouldn't embarrass her on her first day. The challenge of it straightened her spine. She'd faced worse than a temperamental stove. She'd lost a husband to fever, a home to debt collectors, and her dignity to men who thought her worth could be measured in dollars owed. A kitchen was something she could control. Food was something she understood. "Thank you, James," she said. "I can manage from here." He hesitated at the door. "Ma'am, don't take it personal if the men are rough around the edges. We don't get many women out here, and the ones who do come don't usually stay. They're not trying to be cruel. They just don't see the point in getting friendly when you'll probably be gone in a week." "I'm not leaving in a week." Something in her tone made him look at her differently. Really look at her, past the dusty dress and tired eyes to the iron underneath. "Well then," he said quietly, "I hope Big Bertha knows what she's in for." Alone in the kitchen, Eliza rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The first step was inventory. She went through every shelf, cupboard, and barrel, cataloging what was available. Flour, plenty. Salt pork, enough. Beans, good supply. Dried beef, cornmeal, molasses, lard. Coffee, thank God, a good amount. Onions, sprouting but usable. No fresh vegetables, no eggs, no milk. So it would be frontier staples, filling, functional, nothing fancy. She could work with that. Next came the stove. Eliza knelt in front of Big Bertha like a supplicant before an ancient god and opened the fire door. Cold ash and old coals greeted her. She cleaned it out, built a new fire with kindling and split wood from the box beside the stove, and lit it with one of the matches from the tin on the shelf. The fire caught. Smoke billowed out the wrong direction, making her cough and wave her hand frantically. She adjusted the damper. No change. Adjusted the vent. More smoke. She tried the other damper, and finally, the smoke began drawing properly up the chimney. "So that's your game," she muttered. "Have to be coaxed." The stove began to heat, and Eliza got to work on dinner. She decided on beef stew, hard to ruin, would stretch to feed everyone, and could simmer while she figured out bread. She diced the dried beef into chunks, set them to brown in a heavy pot with some lard, and added water from the pump at the sink. Onions went in next, along with a generous amount of salt and black pepper. It would be simple, but it would be hot and filling, and that was what mattered. While the stew simmered, she tackled bread. Her hands remembered the rhythm even if her mind was tired. Flour, water, salt. A bit of lard worked in until the dough came together. She kneaded it on the scarred counter, feeling the texture change under her palms, then divided it into portions and shaped them into rough loaves. By the time she slid the bread into Big Bertha's oven, the sun had shifted lower in the sky. Sweat ran down her back, and her arms ached, but the kitchen smelled like food. Real food, not the burnt offerings or half-hearted attempts that must have characterized recent meals. She made coffee next, strong enough to wake the dead, and set the pot on the stove's warming surface. At precisely 7 o'clock, boots thundered on the porch. The men came in like a storm, loud, dirty, hungry, filling the dining room with their presence. Eliza heard Cole's voice cutting through the noise, directing them to wash up before they sat down. She stood in the kitchen doorway, clutching a ladle, and watched them settle at the table. 12 men, just as Cole had said. They ranged from James's youth to grizzled veterans who looked like they'd been cowboying since before she was born. They were sunburned, dust-covered, and eyeing her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to skepticism to complete disinterest. Cole sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. "Stew and bread," Eliza announced, her voice steady. "Coffee's hot." She served them, moving around the table with the heavy pot, ladling stew into tin bowls. The men accepted their portions in silence, waiting until everyone was served before anyone picked up a spoon. That was Cole's rule, she realized. No one ate until everyone had food. He took the first bite. The room held its breath. His expression didn't change, but he took a second bite. then a third. Then he reached for the bread, tore off a chunk, and dipped it in the stew. That was apparently the signal. The men fell on their food like wolves, and the only sounds for the next several minutes were spoons scraping bowls and bread being torn apart. Eliza stood by the kitchen door, heart pounding, watching them eat. They were shoveling it down like they hadn't seen food in days. That was good, right? That meant it was at least acceptable? Ma'am? One of the older hands, gray-bearded with kind eyes, looked up at her. This is damn good stew. Bread's not bad either. Best meal we've had in months, another agreed. Don't talk with your mouth full, Carson, Cole said, but there was no heat in it. James caught her eye and gave her a small, encouraging nod. They wanted seconds, then thirds. By the time they were finished, both the stew pot and the bread basket were empty, scraped clean. The men pushed back from the table with satisfied groans, and for the first time since she'd arrived, some of them actually looked at her like she might be a person, rather than another disappointment waiting to happen. Thank you for the meal, ma'am, the gray-bearded man said as they filed out. Several others echoed him, awkward but sincere. Then they were gone, back to whatever work or rest awaited them, leaving Eliza alone with a table full of dirty dishes and Cole Braddock, who hadn't moved from his seat. He looked at her for a long moment, his pale eyes unreadable in the lamplight. You'll do, he said finally. For now. It wasn't praise. It wasn't even close to warm. But coming from him, it felt like a victory. He stood and walked out without another word, and Eliza was alone with the dishes. She washed them in water heated on Big Bertha, her hands red and aching by the time she finished. The kitchen needed cleaning. Flour dusted the counter, the floor was tracked with dirt from the men's boots, and the stove needed to be banked for the night. It was past 9 when she finally climbed the stairs to her room. The space was small but clean, a narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk at the foot for her belongings. A single window looked out over the dark prairie, where stars blazed like cold fire in the endless sky. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her filthy dress, and felt the day crash over her like a wave. The exhaustion, the fear she'd been holding at bay, the crushing weight of knowing this was truly her last chance. But she'd survived it. The first day, the first meal, the first test. She'd survived worse. She undressed slowly, wincing as her muscles protested. Her morning dress hung on the back of the door, and she looked at it for a long moment before turning away. Tomorrow she'd need to find something more practical to work in. Morning was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She lay down on the thin mattress and closed her eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. The wind rattled the window frame, and beneath it all, the vast silence of the prairie pressed in from all sides, the same silence that had driven the previous cook away. But Eliza had learned to live with silence. Silence was better than the lies and betrayals that had destroyed her old life. Silence was honest. Silence asked nothing and promised nothing. She could work with that. Dawn came at 4:30 with a rooster's crow that sounded like a declaration of war. Eliza jerked awake, disoriented for a moment about where she was. Then reality settled back like a stone. Blackwood Ranch, the kitchen. Breakfast in 30 minutes for 12 hungry men. She was on her feet before she'd fully processed being awake. The house was silent as she crept downstairs in the pre-dawn darkness. She lit lamps in the kitchen, coaxed Big Bertha back to life. Easier today, now that she knew the stove's tricks, and took stock of what she needed to make. Bacon. Eggs, if she could find any. Biscuits, coffee. Lots of coffee. She found eggs in the cold cellar, not fresh, but recent enough, and got to work. The bacon went into her largest skillet, filling the kitchen with the smell of salt and smoke. She mixed biscuit dough with practiced efficiency, rolled it out, cut it into rounds, and slid the pan into the oven. The eggs she'd saved to cook last, scrambling them in bacon grease once everything else was ready. By 5 o'clock, the table was set and the food was ready. The men arrived like clockwork, quieter in the morning than they'd been at dinner, moving with the slow deliberation of people not quite awake. They filled their plates and ate quickly, mechanically, fueling themselves for the day ahead. Cole was the last to arrive, and he looked like he'd already been up for hours. His shirt was different from the one he'd worn yesterday, but just as faded, and there was dirt under his fingernails that spoke of early morning work before the sun rose. He ate without comment, drained 2 cups of coffee, and stood. James, you're with me on the north fence. Thomas, take Carson and Henry and check the water troughs. We're low, and I want to know why. Rest of you know your jobs. The men nodded and filed out, taking their energy with them. Eliza was left with another mountain of dishes. The pattern repeated itself at lunch. Beef hash with potatoes, more coffee, more efficient eating, and again at dinner, where she made pan-fried steaks with beans and cornbread. Each meal was met with the same focused consumption, the same grudging appreciation, the same swift departure. The men treated her with distant courtesy, never quite rude but never quite friendly. She was a service they used, like the well or the barn. It stung less than she'd expected. She'd learned not to need warmth from strangers. Cole continued to be an enigma. He spoke to her only when necessary, usually brief instructions about meal times or how many men to expect. He never praised the food, but he never complained either, which she took as approval. He moved through the ranch like a force of nature, everywhere and nowhere, his attention on 1,000 details she couldn't see. But she caught him watching her sometimes. Not unkindly, not with any particular interest, just watching, like he was waiting to see if she'd crack. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. The days blurred together into a rhythm of work. Up before dawn, breakfast, cleaning, lunch, cleaning, dinner, cleaning, collapse into bed. Her hands developed new calluses, her feet stopped hurting. She learned Big Bertha's moods, learned which men liked their coffee sweet and which wanted it black as sin, learned that the gray-bearded man was named Arthur and had worked for Cole for 15 years, learned that James was the youngest hand, and sometimes looked at her like she was a miracle he didn't quite believe in. She learned that Cole Braddock never smiled. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. She was still here, still cooking, still surviving. The men began to thaw slightly, small nods of greeting, the occasional "morning, ma'am," questions about whether there'd be pie for Sunday dinner. They stopped treating her like she was temporary, but the ranch itself remained unforgiving. The heat was relentless, the work was endless, and the isolation pressed in from all sides. No neighbors, no town within easy distance, nothing but prairie and sky and the handful of souls trapped together in this remote corner of the world. Eliza understood why the other women had left. This place would drive you mad if you needed conversation, company, softness. If you needed to be seen as more than a pair of hands that kept everyone fed. But she'd already been driven to her knees by a world that pretended to be civilized. At least here, the brutality was honest. At least here, she knew where she stood. It was a month into her tenure when the accident happened. She was preparing dinner, chicken stewed with carrots she'd found in the cellar, still firm enough to use, when shouting erupted from the direction of the barn. Not the usual working noise, but panicked voices calling for help. Eliza ran outside without thinking. Men were gathered near the barn, a knot of bodies surrounding something on the ground. She pushed through them, and her stomach dropped. James lay in the dirt, his leg bent at an angle that was absolutely wrong, blood soaking through his trousers. His face was white, his breathing shallow. "Horse spooked," someone was saying. "Threw him into the fence. Leg caught." "Move!" Eliza's voice cut through the chaos. "Get him inside, now, carefully. Arthur, I need whiskey, clean cloth, and boiling water. Someone get Cole." The men stared at her for a heartbeat, and she saw the indecision flicker across their faces. Who was she to give orders? "Now," she snapped, with enough authority that they moved. They carried James into the house, laying him on the kitchen table because it was the largest flat surface. He was making sounds that weren't quite screams, his body trying to process pain it didn't have words for. Eliza's hands were steady as she cut away his trousers. The leg was definitely broken, compound fracture, the bone pressing against the skin. If they didn't set it right, he'd lose the leg. If infection set in, he'd lose his life. She'd seen this before, had learned from the army doctor who'd come through her town during the war, had helped him set bones and stitch wounds when there was no one else to assist. "James," she said firmly, catching his gaze, "look at me. This is going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt, but I need you to stay still. Can you do that?" He nodded, teeth clenched. "Bite down on this." She shoved a wooden spoon into his mouth. "Arthur, hold his shoulders. Thomas, hold his good leg." Cole arrived as she was examining the break, his face grim. "How bad?" "Bad. Compound fracture. Needs to be set now or he'll lose the leg. You know how to do that? Yes. He didn't question it, didn't demand her credentials. He just nodded and moved to James's other side, his large hands gentle as they positioned themselves to help. On 3, Eliza said. 1, 2. She pulled on the count of 2, not 3, because it was always better when they didn't have time to tense up. James's scream was muffled by the spoon, his body arching off the table. She felt the bone shift, grind, then slip back into alignment. Hold him, she barked as he thrashed. She worked quickly, splinting the leg with boards Arthur had found, wrapping it tight. Her hands were bloody by the time she finished, but the leg was straight, the wound cleaned as best she could manage. James had passed out from the pain, which was probably a mercy. He needs to stay still for at least 6 weeks, Eliza said, washing her hands in the basin Arthur had brought. The bone needs time to knit. If he puts weight on it too soon, it'll break again. And we need to watch for infection. Any fever, any redness spreading from the wound, we'll have to act fast. Cole was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Where did you learn to do that? My town during the war, she said simply. There were more wounded than doctors. You learned, or people died. He nodded slowly, and something shifted in his pale eyes. Respect, maybe. Or at least recognition that she was more than he'd assumed. Get him to the bunkhouse, Cole told the men. Carefully, ma'am, I'll need you to check on him regularly. Make sure the fever doesn't set in. Of course. The men carried James out, moving with a gentleness she hadn't known they possessed. Cole remained, looking at the blood on the kitchen table, the torn fabric, the evidence of the violence that had just occurred. That's twice now, he said quietly, that you've done something I didn't expect. What was the first time? Staying. He walked out before she could respond. Eliza stood in the wrecked kitchen, her dress splattered with blood, her hands trembling now that the crisis had passed. She looked at the stew still simmering on the stove. Dinner would need to be finished, the table would need to be cleaned, the work would continue because it always did. But something had shifted today. She'd proven herself in a way that cooking never could. She'd shown them that she wasn't just someone who made food and cleaned floors. She was someone who could keep her head when everything went to hell, who could make life or death decisions and live with the consequences. The ranch would remember that, and so would Cole Braddock. James developed a fever on the 3rd night. Eliza was checking on him before bed, part of the routine she'd established, visiting the bunkhouse after dinner to change his dressings and assess the wound, when she pressed her hand to his forehead and felt the heat radiating from his skin like a furnace. Her stomach clenched. Infection, the thing she'd feared most. Arthur, she called to the older man who'd been keeping watch. Get Cole, now! She unwrapped the splint with careful hands, her breath catching when she saw the skin around the break. Red, swollen, the kind of angry inflammation that spoke of poison spreading through the body. Cole arrived within minutes, his hair disheveled like he'd been dragged from sleep. He took one look at James's flushed face, and the wound and his jaw tightened. How bad? Bad enough that if we don't act now, he'll lose the leg. Eliza met his eyes. Or worse. What do you need? Whiskey. As much as we have. Clean bandages. A sharp knife heated in fire until it glows, and I need everyone out except you and Arthur. Cole didn't hesitate. You heard her. Move. The bunkhouse cleared in seconds, men filing out into the night with worried backward glances. Cole gathered the supplies while Eliza prepared herself for what came next. She'd seen this done twice during the war, cutting away infected tissue to save the whole. She'd assisted, held instruments, steadied patients, but she'd never done it herself. Tonight she had no choice. This is going to hurt him, she said quietly, when Cole returned with the knife, its blade glowing red from the forge. A lot. He might not survive the shock. And if you don't do it? He definitely won't survive. Cole's expression was granite. Then do it. They poured whiskey over the wound first. James screamed even in his fevered state, and then Eliza took the knife. Her hand was steady, her mind clear, her body moving through motions she'd memorized from watching others. Cut away the infected flesh. Cauterize what bled too much. Clean everything with more whiskey. Work fast because every second mattered. James thrashed despite Arthur and Cole holding him down. The smell of burning flesh filled the bunkhouse, acrid and sickening. Eliza's stomach roiled, but her hands never wavered. When it was done, she bandaged the wound with clean cloth soaked in whiskey and stepped back, her dress stained with blood and her arms shaking from held tension. "Now we wait," she whispered. "The fever will either break or it won't." Cole was staring at her again with that unreadable expression, but this time there was something else beneath it, something that looked almost like awe. "Where the hell did you learn to do that?" he asked. "I told you, the war." "That's more than assisting a doctor. That's battlefield surgery." Eliza met his gaze without flinching. "When there are more dying men than doctors, you learn to do what needs doing, or you watch them die. I got tired of watching." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something in his face crack, just slightly, just enough to glimpse the man beneath the cold exterior. "Stay with him tonight," he said. "I'll send someone to handle breakfast." "I can do both." "I'm not asking." His voice was firm but not harsh. "You've done enough. Rest." It wasn't a request. It was an order given by someone who decided she was worth protecting. The fever broke at dawn. Eliza was dozing in the chair beside James's bed when she felt his forehead again and found it cooler, the terrible heat finally releasing its grip. His breathing had evened out, his face no longer flushed with that frightening color. He'd live. The leg would heal. She'd done it. She laid her head down on the edge of the bed and let herself cry. Just for a moment, just enough to release the terror she'd been holding locked behind her ribs. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and went to make breakfast. The men were subdued that morning, eating their eggs and biscuits in unusual quiet. They'd heard James's screams. They knew how close they'd come to losing him, and they'd seen what Eliza had done to save him. When Cole came in, he looked at the food on the table and then at her. "I told you to rest." "I rested. Now I'm working." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Stubborn." "Yes." He sat down and ate, and the men followed his lead, but the atmosphere had changed. They looked at her differently now, not with the polite distance of hired help, but with something closer to respect. She'd earned her place here in a language they understood: blood, skill, and the willingness to do what was necessary when it mattered most. Arthur approached her after breakfast as she was clearing dishes. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, what you did last night, that was something. Most folks would have panicked or given up. You didn't." "I couldn't let him die." "No, I suppose you couldn't." He paused, turning his hat in his weathered hands. "But you could have failed, could have made it worse. Takes guts to try when the stakes are that high." "Or desperation," she said quietly. "Sometimes those are the same thing." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his grizzled face. "You're all right, Mrs. Warren. Better than all right. You're one of us now." She didn't realize how much she'd needed to hear that until the words landed. One of us. Not an outsider, not temporary, not tolerated, but accepted. It shouldn't have mattered. She'd survived without belonging for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something larger than herself. But standing in that kitchen with dirty dishes in her hands and Arthur's approval warming her like whiskey, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. James recovered slowly, restlessly, chafing against the forced inactivity, but smart enough not to risk permanent damage by being stupid. Eliza checked on him daily, changing dressings and monitoring the wound's healing. The infection didn't return. The bone was setting properly. He'd walk again, though he'd probably limp when the weather turned cold. "You saved my life," he said one afternoon while she was rewrapping the splint. "I did my job." "Your job is cooking." "My job is keeping everyone alive long enough to eat the cooking," she corrected, and he laughed, a sound that felt like victory. The days stretched into weeks, and Eliza found her rhythm. She woke before the sun, coaxed Big Bertha to life, and prepared meals that became increasingly ambitious as she learned what supplies were available and what the men preferred. She kept the house clean, mended clothes when asked, and carved out a space for herself that felt almost comfortable. The isolation stopped bothering her. The silence became familiar instead of oppressive. The endless work became routine rather than overwhelming. She was surviving. More than that, she was succeeding. But she was also starting to notice things about Cole Braddock that didn't fit the image of the cold, distant ranch owner she'd first encountered. Like how he checked on James twice a day, always brief visits but consistent, making sure his man had everything he needed. How he split James's work among the other hands without complaint, absorbing the loss of labor without cutting anyone's wages. How he paid attention to details most bosses would miss, noticing when a man was favoring an injury, when someone was pushing too hard, when the mood in the bunkhouse was off. He was hard, yes, demanding, absolutely, but not cruel. Never cruel. And he'd started talking to her. Not much. Cole Braddock wasn't a man who wasted words, but small exchanges during meals, brief conversations when she brought coffee to wherever he was working, questions about supplies or James's recovery. He asked her opinion on things. Should they slaughter another steer for meat? Did she think the root cellar would hold through winter? Was there anything she needed from town when Arthur made the supply run? He listened when she answered. Actually listened, considering her words instead of dismissing them. It was more respect than her own husband had shown her in 5 years of marriage. One evening, about 6 weeks after James's accident, Cole found her behind the house where she'd discovered a small patch of earth that might support a garden. She was on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds from around some struggling plants the previous cook must have started and abandoned. "What are you doing?" he asked. Eliza sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Trying to salvage this garden. If I can get these tomatoes to produce, we'll have fresh vegetables. The carrots might be salvageable too, and I found some herb seeds in the kitchen. Thought I'd try to get them started." He crouched down beside her, studying the plants with a rancher's critical eye. "Soil's not great here. Too dry, too hard." "I know, but I've been using kitchen scraps for compost, and if I water it every day, it might work. Better than nothing." "Why bother? We get by fine without fresh vegetables." She looked at him directly. "Because getting by isn't the same as thriving. Because fresh food keeps men healthier and morale higher. Because this ranch deserves better than fine." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. "You care about this place," he said. It wasn't a question. "I care about doing things right. This place is where I'm doing things, so yes, I suppose I care about it." He was quiet for a moment, his pale eyes studying her with that intensity she'd grown used to. "You're nothing like I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone desperate enough to take any job but not strong enough to handle it. Someone who'd run at the first real challenge." "I am desperate," she said honestly, "but desperation and strength aren't opposites. Sometimes desperation is what gives you strength. When you know there's no safety net, no second chances, no one coming to save you, you find out what you're actually made of." Cole nodded slowly. "What are you made of, Mrs. Warren?" "Same thing as you, I'd guess. Scar tissue and stubbornness." This time he definitely smiled, barely. Just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but real. "That sounds about right." He stood and offered her his hand to help her up. She took it, surprised by the casual gesture of assistance, and felt the strength in his grip, calloused, steady, warm despite the evening cool. "I'll have one of the men help you with the garden," he said. "Thomas used to farm before he came here. He'll know what you need." "Thank you." "And Mrs. Warren?" He paused, looking back at her. "You were right. This ranch does deserve better than fine. I'd forgotten that." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the dirt with her hands filthy and her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Thomas turned out to be a godsend for the garden. He showed her how to amend the soil, built raised beds that would hold moisture better, and taught her which plants would actually survive the harsh conditions. Within 2 weeks, the garden was thriving, or at least surviving, which on the frontier counted as the same thing. The men started to notice. They'd wander by during breaks, checking the progress of the tomatoes or asking when the carrots might be ready. It became a shared project, something everyone had a stake in, and the mood around the ranch shifted subtly. People talked more at meals, laughed more. The tension that had defined the place when she first arrived began to ease. Even Cole seemed different, still serious, still demanding, but with less of that hard edge that made him seem carved from stone rather than flesh. Eliza caught herself watching him sometimes, the way he moved with such unconscious confidence. The way his hands were gentle with injured animals, but firm with men who needed direction. The way his rare smiles transformed his face into something almost handsome. She shut those thoughts down quickly. She was here to work, to survive, to build something stable. Romance, if that's what these dangerous feelings were, was a complication she couldn't afford. She'd loved once, married once, and it had ended with her husband dead and her life destroyed. She wouldn't make that mistake again. But it was getting harder to ignore the way her pulse kicked up when Cole walked into a room. The way she found herself cooking things she thought he might particularly like. The way his rare approval felt like sunlight after years of darkness. It was dangerous. It was foolish. It was also inevitable. The shift happened gradually, like dawn breaking, so slow you didn't notice until suddenly everything was lighter. Cole started seeking her out more, asking questions that weren't strictly about ranch business. Where had she lived before? What had brought her west? Did she miss her old life? She answered carefully, revealing only what she was willing to share. A husband dead from fever, debts that consumed everything, no family left to turn to. She didn't mention the betrayal, how her husband's business partner had stolen everything, how the bank had foreclosed with cruelty that still burned, how she'd been blamed for failures that weren't hers. Some wounds were too raw to expose, even to someone who seemed to understand scars. Cole shared more than she expected in return. Not about his past, that remained locked tight, but about the ranch, his plans, his frustrations. He told her about the drought that had nearly broken him 2 years ago, the cattle disease that had decimated the herd, the constant struggle to keep everything running with too few hands and too little capital. "Why stay?" she asked one evening when they'd fallen into conversation on the porch after dinner. The men had retired to the bunkhouse, and the prairie stretched out before them under a sky full of stars. "If it's this hard, why not sell and start over somewhere easier?" "Because easy isn't worth doing," he said, "and because this place is mine. I built it from nothing, and I'll be damned if I let it fail." "Even if it kills you?" He looked at her with those winter sky eyes. "What else is there? This ranch is all I have, all I'll ever have." The loneliness in those words struck her like a physical blow. She understood it too well, the sense of having nothing but work, no connections beyond utility, no hope for anything softer than survival. "That's a bleak way to live," she said quietly. "It's honest. Most people can't handle honesty. They need pretty lies to get through the day." "And you don't?" "I stopped believing in pretty lies a long time ago." Eliza wanted to ask what had killed that belief. What had happened to make him so determined to keep the world at arm's length? But she recognized the walls when she saw them. She'd built enough of her own. Instead, she said, "Honesty doesn't have to mean isolation. You can be honest and still let people in." "Can you?" The question was pointed, deliberate. She looked away. "I'm working on it." "So am I," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Eliza stood abruptly, suddenly aware of how dangerous this moment was, how easy it would be to reach out, to bridge the space between them, to pretend that two broken people could somehow fix each other. "I should clean the kitchen," she said. Cole nodded, but his eyes followed her as she fled inside, and she could feel his gaze like a hand on her back. She scrubbed dishes with more force than necessary, angry at herself for caring, for wanting, for hoping that maybe, just maybe, there could be something here beyond wages and survival. She'd been down this road before. It ended in ashes. But a traitorous part of her heart whispered that Cole Braddock wasn't her dead husband, that this ranch wasn't her old life, that maybe the past didn't have to define the future. She told that voice to shut up and kept scrubbing. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Cole was all business. The men were focused on their work, and Eliza threw herself into cooking and cleaning with single-minded intensity. If he noticed her distance, he didn't comment, but that night she found a package on the kitchen table, brown paper tied with string. Inside was fabric, good fabric, blue cotton that would make a practical work dress, far better than the faded patch things she'd been wearing. There was no note, no explanation, but she knew who'd left it. Eliza held the fabric against her chest and felt something crack inside her, some wall she'd built to protect herself from caring too much. He'd noticed. He'd seen that she needed something and had provided it without making a show of charity, without expecting gratitude, without demanding anything in return. It was a small kindness in a world that had shown her mostly cruelty. It meant everything. She made the dress over the next few evenings, working by lamplight after the day's chores were done. Her stitches were practical rather than pretty, but the dress fit well, and the color reminded her of summer skies she'd almost forgotten existed. When she wore it the first time, Cole's eyes tracked to her immediately. He didn't say anything, but the corner of his mouth twitched, that almost smile she'd learned to recognize. "Thank you," she said when she brought him coffee during the afternoon break. "For what?" "The fabric." "Don't know what you're talking about." But his eyes were amused, and she knew he was lying. "Well, whoever left it has good taste." "Must have been Arthur. He's the sentimental type." "Right. Arthur." She smiled despite herself. "I'll be sure to thank him." Cole's full smile was rare enough that when it appeared, it felt like witnessing something miraculous. It transformed his entire face, erasing years of hard living and revealing the man he might have been without whatever had broken him. "Suits you better than morning black," he said. Eliza's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to notice, much less comment. "I was tired of looking like a ghost." "You never looked like a ghost, just someone carrying too much weight. And now?" He studied her with that penetrating gaze. "Now you look like someone who's figuring out how to set it down." The moment stretched between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to name. Then one of the men called for Cole, and the spell broke. He tipped his hat to her and walked away, leaving her standing in the yard with her heart beating too fast and her careful defenses in shambles. She was in trouble. Deep, dangerous, irreversible trouble. But maybe, just maybe, it was the kind of trouble worth having. That evening, James finally got permission to leave the bunkhouse. His leg healed enough to walk with a crutch. The men celebrated with extra coffee and the dried apple pie Eliza had managed to make, and the mood was lighter than she'd ever seen it. Cole sat at the head of the table, watching his men laugh and joke, and when his eyes met Eliza's across the room, there was something in them that made her flush. Pride, maybe, or recognition of what they'd built together, even if neither had intended to build anything at all. After dinner, after the dishes were done and the men had retired, Cole found her in the garden where she was checking on the tomatoes by lantern light. "Can't stay away from work even after dark?" he asked. "These are almost ready to pick. I wanted to check them." He crouched beside her, studying the plants. "You did good here. Better than good. Thomas helped. Thomas helped because you asked him to. Because you had a vision for something better and you made it happen." He paused. "That's been happening a lot lately." "What do you mean?" "The ranch. It's different. The men are different. Hell, I'm different." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You did that. You came here with nothing, took a job nobody wanted, and somehow you've changed everything." Eliza shook her head. "I just cook and clean." "You know that's not true." His voice was rough, almost angry. "You saved James's life. You built this garden. You made this place feel less like a prison and more like a home. You—" He stopped, jaw working like he was fighting with words that didn't want to be said. "Cole, let me finish." He took a breath. "You scare the hell out of me, Eliza Warren, because I spent years building walls, keeping everyone at a distance, convincing myself I was better off alone. And then you showed up and just walked right through every defense I had. Not by trying to change me or fix me, but just by being exactly who you are. Stubborn and strong and so damn brave it makes my chest hurt." Her heart was thundering. "You scare me too." "Yeah. Yeah. Because I swore I'd never let myself care about anyone again. Caring gets you destroyed. But somehow I care about this place. I care about the men. I care about—" She stopped, unable to finish. "About me?" His voice was barely above a whisper. She met his eyes, those pale winter eyes that had watched her with suspicion and assessment, and now held something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "Yes," she whispered. "About you." Cole reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one calloused hand. "I don't know how to do this. How to be soft. How to be anything other than what I've been. I don't need soft. I need real. Real I can do. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the kisses she remembered from her marriage. Tentative, perfunctory, obligatory. This was fierce and honest and full of desperate need, like they were both drowning and had just found air. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Eliza felt like the world had tilted on its axis. "This is complicated," she said. "Everything worth having is complicated. I'm your employee. You're more than that. You know you are." She did know. Had known for weeks, maybe longer. But naming it made it real, made it something they couldn't take back. "What happens now?" she asked. Cole smiled, a real smile, full and genuine. "Now we figure it out. Together. One day at a time, just like everything else on this ranch." "Together," she repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign and familiar all at once, like coming home after years of wandering. "Together," he confirmed. "If you'll have me. Scars and stubbornness and all." Liza thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. The power imbalance, her history, his walls, the frontier's harsh judgment of women who complicated their situations. All of it. Then she thought about his hand on her face, his honesty, the way he saw her not as someone to be rescued, but as an equal, scarred and strong and worthy. "Yes," she said, "I'll have you." And when he kissed her again, under a sky full of stars with the prairie wind singing around them, Eliza felt something she'd thought was lost forever. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The change between them was subtle enough that the men didn't notice at first, or if they did, they were smart enough to keep their mouths shut. Cole and Eliza moved around each other with the same efficiency as before. But now there were moments, brief touches when passing in doorways, exchanged glances across the dinner table, his hand lingering on her shoulder when he thanked her for coffee, that spoke of something deeper than employer and employee. Arthur noticed first because Arthur noticed everything. He caught Eliza's eye one morning while she was serving breakfast and gave her the smallest nod of approval, a gesture that said he understood and wouldn't make trouble. She felt a rush of gratitude for the old cowboy's discretion. James was recovering well, back to light work with his crutch, and he watched Cole and Eliza with the romantic optimism of youth. "About time," he muttered to Thomas one afternoon, loud enough for Eliza to overhear. "Man's been alone too long. Does him good to have someone who doesn't flinch when he barks orders?" "Does her good too," Thomas replied. "She's different than when she arrived. Lighter, somehow." Eliza pretended not to hear them, but the words settled warm in her chest. She was lighter. The constant tension she'd carried since her husband's death, the fear of failing, of being cast out, of having nowhere to go, had eased. Not disappeared because survival on the frontier never allowed complete peace, but transformed into something manageable. She had a place here. She had purpose. And she had Cole. In whatever way that manifested between two people too scarred to rush headlong into declarations, but too honest to deny what was growing between them. They fell into a new rhythm, one that felt natural despite its newness. Cole would find her after dinner and they'd walk the property together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his plans to expand the herd, about water rights disputes with neighboring ranches, about the constant calculation of profit and loss that defined his days. She told him about the small triumphs in the kitchen, about the garden's progress, about the book she'd found in the house, a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that she read by lamplight when exhaustion allowed. "You read poetry?" he'd asked, surprise coloring his voice. "I used to read everything. Before. She didn't elaborate on the before, but he understood. Before the debts. Before the death. Before survival became the only priority. "Read to me sometime," he said. "I'm not much for fancy words, but I'd like to hear how they sound in your voice." So she did, sitting on the porch after the men had retired, reading sonnets about love and loss and time's relentless passage, while Cole listened with his eyes closed, his expression peaceful in a way she'd never seen. It was the small intimacies that undid her, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the quiet moments of shared existence. The way he started leaving wildflowers on the kitchen windowsill, prairie blooms he'd picked during his rides. The way she made sure his coffee was exactly how he liked it, strong enough to strip paint, but with just a touch of sugar. The way they'd found each other in the darkness one night, his room or hers, it didn't matter, and discovered that passion didn't require softness, that desire could be fierce and honest and utterly real. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets with the moon painting silver across the floor, Cole had traced the scars on her hands, burns from the stove, cuts from kitchen work, calluses from labor. "These tell a story," he said quietly. "Not a very interesting one. Just survival. Survival is always interesting. It's the most honest story there is." He kissed her palm, a gesture so tender it made her throat tight. "You've survived things that would have broken most people. That's not nothing. You've survived too. You carry your own scars." His expression shuddered slightly. "Mine are different." Different doesn't mean less valid. She propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight. "You don't have to tell me, but I want you to know that whatever put those walls up, whatever made you believe you had to be alone, it doesn't change how I see you. And how do you see me? As someone worth knowing, worth caring about, worth—" She stopped, the word love hovering unspoken between them, too soon and too dangerous to voice. Cole pulled her down into another kiss, and she understood that some conversations would take time. They were both too damaged to rush, too cautious to throw words around carelessly. What they were building required patience, but they were building it. That was what mattered. The weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. The garden thrived, producing tomatoes and carrots and herbs that transformed the meals from purely functional to actually good. The men's morale improved further, and even the quality of their work seemed sharper, more focused. A ranch that felt like home, Eliza realized, was a ranch where people invested themselves fully. Cole noticed it too. "Production's up," he said one evening, reviewing the books in his small office while Eliza sat nearby mending shirts. "More than I've seen in 3 years. The men are working harder, staying longer, caring more about outcomes." "People work better when they're not just surviving," Eliza said, "when they have something to care about beyond wages." "Is that what you have? Something to care about beyond wages?" She looked up from her mending, meeting his eyes. "You know I do." He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his face. "Yeah, I know." But their fragile peace was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon when riders appeared on the horizon. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw them. 4 men on horseback, moving with the purposeful stride of people who had business rather than courtesy in mind. Her stomach clenched with instinctive unease. Cole emerged from the barn, his posture immediately defensive. Arthur and Thomas flanked him, and Eliza noticed how the other hands had stopped working to watch, their bodies tense. The riders pulled up at the gate. The leader was a heavy-set man with a beard that needed trimming and eyes that assessed everything with calculating greed. His companions looked like hired muscle, hard men with guns worn easy on their hips. "Cole Braddock," the bearded man called out. "Been a while." "Marcus," Cole's voice was flat, giving away nothing. "What brings you to my land?" "Just being neighborly. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're managing." Marcus's eyes swept the ranch, lingering on the repairs that had been made, the organized work areas, the signs of an operation that was succeeding despite the odds. "Looks like you're doing all right for yourself." "Well enough?" "That's good. Real good." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I've been thinking about our conversation from last year. About my offer to buy this place." Cole's jaw tightened. "I told you then, ranch isn't for sale." Now, don't be hasty. I'm prepared to be generous, more generous than before, seeing as how you've clearly put some work into the place." His gaze slid to Eliza, still standing by the laundry line, and something in his expression made her skin crawl. "Got yourself some help, I see." "Pretty help." "Mrs. Warren is the ranch cook," Cole said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And she's none of your concern. Everything on this ranch is my concern, friend, because sooner or later it's all going to be mine." Marcus leaned forward in his saddle. "You can sell to me now, take a fair price and walk away with your dignity. Or you can wait until the drought comes back. And it will come back, Cole. It always does, and I'll take it from you for pennies on the dollar. Get off my land. That's not very neighborly. I'm not your neighbor. You're 10 miles south. which means you rode a long way just to waste my time. Cole's hand had moved to rest on his belt, close to where Eliza knew he kept a pistol. So I'll say it again, get off my land. Marcus's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their own weapons. The tension ratcheted up to something explosive, and Eliza felt her heart hammering against her ribs. But Marcus held up a hand, stopping his men. All right, we're going. But think about my offer, Cole. Really think about it. Because a man alone trying to run a place like this, that's a hard life. Dangerous even. Things can happen. Accidents, bad luck. Would be a shame if something went wrong. Is that a threat? That's friendly advice. Marcus smiled again, cold and reptilian. You take care now. They rode away slowly, deliberately, making it clear they weren't afraid and weren't finished. Cole stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge, his body rigid with barely contained rage. Boss? Arthur's voice was careful. Double the watch at night, Cole said without turning around, and make sure everyone's armed when they're working outside. Marcus doesn't make threats he doesn't intend to follow through on. The men dispersed to spread the word, leaving Cole and Eliza alone in the yard. She approached him carefully, reading the fury in every line of his body. Who is he? She asked quietly. Marcus Thornton. Owns the biggest ranch in the territory. Been trying to buy me out for 5 years, ever since his operation got too big for his land to support. He wants my water rights. Cole turned to her, and his eyes were bleak. He's not going to stop, Eliza. He'll push and push until something breaks. Then we don't break. You don't understand. Marcus doesn't play fair. If he can't buy me out, he'll find other ways. Poisoned wells, killed cattle, burned barns. I've seen him destroy 3 other ranchers who wouldn't sell. So we prepare. We watch. We don't give him an opening. Cole grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight but not painful. This isn't your fight. You could leave, go somewhere safer. No. The word was absolute. I'm not leaving. This is my home now, and I don't run from fights anymore. I did that once and lost everything. Not again. He might come after you to get to me. Then he'll learn I'm harder to break than he expects. She covered his hands with hers. We face this together, Cole. That's what we said, remember? Together. He pulled her into a fierce embrace, his face buried in her hair. She felt him trembling, not with fear but with the effort of holding back emotions he'd spent years learning to suppress. I can't lose you, he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear. I just found you. I can't lose you. You won't, I promise. It was a promise neither of them could guarantee, but they both needed to hear it anyway. That night, Cole called a meeting in the bunkhouse with all the hands. Eliza attended too, standing beside him as he laid out the situation with brutal honesty. Marcus Thornton wants this ranch, Cole said. He's going to try to take it. That might mean sabotage. It might mean violence. It might mean a legal fight I can't afford. I won't force any of you to stay for what's coming. If you want to leave, I understand. I'll give you wages through the end of the month and a reference for your next position. The men exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening in looks and subtle gestures. Finally, Arthur spoke up. How long I've been working for you, boss? 15 years? 15 years? You know how many times I could have left for easier work? Better wages? Ranches that weren't fighting tooth and nail just to survive? Arthur stood, his weathered face set with determination. I stayed because this place matters, because you built something worth fighting for. So if Marcus Thornton thinks he's taking it without a fight, he's got another thing coming. I'm staying too, James said, struggling to his feet with his crutch. You saved my life by keeping me on after I got hurt. Mrs. Warren saved it by fixing my leg. That kind of loyalty goes both ways. One by one, every man in the room stood. Thomas, Carson, Henry. Young William, who'd only been with them 6 months. Old Pete, who'd been cowboying longer than most of them had been alive. Every single one committed to staying, to fighting, to protecting what they'd built together. Eliza felt tears burning in her eyes and didn't bother to hide them. This was what community looked like, what loyalty looked like, what family looked like, even if it was cobbled together from broken pieces and hard men who'd learned to care despite themselves. All right, Cole said, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to contain. Then we prepare. We work in pairs outside the ranch yard. We keep weapons close. We watch for anything unusual. And we don't give Marcus a single opening to exploit. What about you, ma'am? Thomas asked, looking at Eliza. You're going to be in the house alone most days. I'll be fine, she said. I'm not helpless, and I can handle a rifle if needed. Still, Cole said, someone stays close to the house at all times. Rotating shifts. I want you protected. She wanted to argue that she didn't need protecting, but she understood the gesture for what it was. Not doubt in her capabilities, but fear for her safety. And given what Marcus had implied, that fear wasn't irrational. All right, she agreed, but I'm not hiding in the kitchen. I'll do my part. Never thought you wouldn't, Cole said, and the pride in his voice made her stand taller. The meeting ended with a sense of grim purpose. The men dispersed to their bunks, talking quietly among themselves, and Cole and Eliza walked back to the main house under a sky full of stars that seemed colder than usual. I'm scared, she admitted when they were alone. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. But I'm also angry. Marcus thinks he can just take what doesn't belong to him because he has money and power. I've seen that before. Men who believe their wealth gives them the right to destroy others. I'm sick of it. Cole stopped walking and turned to face her. This could get ugly, Eliza. Really ugly. I need you to understand that. I understand, but I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the feeling in case the future took it away. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. You're the strongest person I've ever met, he said. No, I'm just the most stubborn. That too. They went inside together, and that night they held each other with extra fierceness, both aware that their hard-won peace was now under threat. But they also knew something Marcus Thornton didn't understand. They weren't just fighting for land or water rights. They were fighting for home, for belonging, for the right to build something good in a world that tried to tear good things apart. And that made them far more dangerous than Marcus expected. The next few weeks were tense. Everyone worked with one eye on the horizon, watching for riders or signs of sabotage. Cole increased patrols of the fence lines and water sources, looking for any indication that Marcus was making his move. Nothing happened, which somehow made it worse. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Eliza threw herself into work, keeping busy to avoid dwelling on possibilities. She expanded the garden, put up preserves from the vegetables they'd grown, reorganized the entire kitchen for better efficiency. She taught herself to shoot with Cole's rifle, practicing on tin cans until her aim was decent, if not perfect. Cole watched her one afternoon as she reloaded, his expression unreadable. What? She asked. Just thinking about how you arrived here. Exhausted, desperate, wearing morning black and looking like the wind might blow you away. He approached her, taking the rifle gently and setting it aside. Look at you now, armed, capable, ready to defend what's yours. What's ours? She corrected. Ours, he agreed. I like the sound of that. So do I. He kissed her softly, a contrast to the violence they were preparing for, and she let herself sink into it. These moments of peace were precious now, stolen time before whatever storm was coming arrived. The storm came on a moonless night 3 weeks after Marcus's visit. Eliza woke to the smell of smoke. She was on her feet instantly, heart pounding, and threw open her door to find Cole already in the hallway, pulling on his boots. The barn, he said tersely. Get to the root cellar and stay there. Like hell, Eliza, please. His eyes were desperate. If something happens to me, this ranch needs you. Stay safe. He was gone before she could argue, running toward the orange glow visible through the windows. Eliza stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds, then grabbed her skirt and ran after him. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like clawed hands. Men were already running with buckets from the well, forming a chain to fight the fire. But Eliza could see it was hopeless. The barn was lost. The only question was whether they could save the surrounding buildings. The horses! Someone shouted. Cole was already moving toward the barn doors, and Eliza's blood turned to ice. There were 6 horses in there, terrified and trapped, and Cole was going to run into a burning building to save them. Cole, no! She screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar of flames. He disappeared into the smoke, and Eliza felt her heart stop. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stand paralyzed with terror as seconds ticked by like hours. Then he emerged, leading 2 panicked horses, their eyes white with fear. He handed them off to Arthur and turned back toward the inferno. "Someone stop him!" Eliza shouted, but no one could. Cole was already gone again, back into the smoke and heat and collapsing timber. He came out twice more, each time with horses, each time looking more scorched and exhausted. 5 horses saved, 1 left inside. The barn's roof groaned, a sound like the earth splitting open. "Cole, it's coming down!" Thomas yelled. But Cole went back in anyway, and Eliza heard herself screaming his name, felt hands grabbing her to keep her from running after him, felt her entire world narrowing to that barn entrance where smoke poured out like a living thing. The roof began to collapse. And then Cole burst through the doors, the last horse beside him, and they both stumbled clear just as the entire structure came down in an explosion of sparks and crashing timber. Cole fell to his knees, coughing violently, his shirt scorched and his hands blistered, and Eliza finally broke free from whoever had been holding her and ran to him. "You absolute fool," she sobbed, her hands on his face, checking him for injuries even as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You could have died." "Had to save them," he rasped. "The horses aren't worth your life." "Everything here is worth my life. That's the point." He looked up at her, his pale eyes streaming from smoke, and grabbed her hand. That's always been the point. Around them, the men had managed to prevent the fire from spreading, though the barn was a total loss. The horses were safe, milling around nervously, but alive. The damage was contained. But the message was clear. Marcus had made his move. "Was it him?" Eliza asked as Arthur helped Cole to his feet. "Had to be," Cole said. "This wasn't an accident." "Then we hit back," Arthur said, his voice harder than Eliza had ever heard it. "Can't let this stand, boss." "No," Cole said firmly. "That's what he wants, for us to retaliate so he can claim self-defense when he escalates. We document everything. We file a report with the territorial marshal, and we prepare for his next move." "And when he makes it?" Eliza asked. Cole looked at the smoldering ruins of his barn, his jaw set with grim determination. "Then we make sure it's his last." Dawn broke over the charred skeleton of the barn, revealing the full extent of the damage in unforgiving detail. What had been a solid structure just hours before was now a blackened ruin, still smoking in places, the air thick with the acrid smell of burned wood and ash. The horses stood in a makeshift corral the men had erected during the night, restless and traumatized, but alive. Eliza had spent the hours before sunrise treating Cole's burns with lard and clean bandages, her hands steady despite the fear that still coursed through her veins. His palms were blistered, his forearms scorched, and there was a burn along his shoulder where a falling ember had caught his shirt. He'd barely flinched during the treatment, his jaw set against the pain, his eyes distant as he calculated losses and next steps. "You need rest," she'd told him as the sky began to lighten. "I need to secure this ranch," he'd replied, his voice raw from smoke inhalation. "Marcus will be watching to see how we respond. If we look weak, he'll hit us again." "You almost died last night. That's not weakness. That's survival." He'd looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her chest ache. "I know what I'm doing, Eliza. I hope so, because I can't—" Her voice had broken, the terror of watching him disappear into that burning barn still too fresh. "I can't watch you die. I've already buried one man I cared about. I can't do it again." Cole had pulled her close despite his injured hands, holding her with fierce tenderness. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." But promises were fragile things on the frontier, easily broken by fire or violence, or the cruel mathematics of men like Marcus Thornton. The men gathered in the yard as the sun rose fully, their faces grim and their bodies exhausted from fighting the fire all night. Cole stood before them, his bandaged hands hanging at his sides, his voice carrying despite its roughness. "What happened last night was arson. We all know who's responsible, even if we can't prove it yet. Marcus Thornton wants us afraid, wants us to break, wants us to make mistakes he can exploit." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across each man. "We're not going to give him that satisfaction. We rebuild, we fortify. We document every suspicious incident and we stay united. That's how we win this." "What about hitting back?" Carson asked, echoing Arthur's sentiment from the night before. "Can't just let him burn our barn and walk away." "Yes, we can," Cole said firmly. "Because the moment we retaliate, we lose the moral high ground. The territorial marshal is 3 days' ride from here. I'm sending Arthur with a full report today. We do this legally, by the book. So when Marcus makes his next move, there's a record of his aggression. And if the law doesn't care? Thomas asked quietly. The question hung heavy in the morning air. They all knew the answer. Frontier justice was often slow, sometimes corrupt, and rarely concerned with small ranchers being squeezed out by larger operations. The law protected those who could afford it, and Marcus Thornton had deep pockets. Then we protect ourselves, Cole said. But we try the legal route first. We prove we're not the problem. The men nodded, reluctant but trusting. They dispersed to begin the day's work, moving more slowly than usual, their exhaustion evident in every gesture. Eliza returned to the house to prepare breakfast, her mind churning with worry and calculation. The barn could be rebuilt, but it would take time and money they didn't have surplus of. The psychological impact was worse. Everyone was on edge, jumping at shadows, expecting the next attack to come at any moment. She was mixing biscuit dough when Cole appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face drawn with pain he was trying to hide. You need to eat something, she said, and take more willow bark tea for the pain. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're hurt and exhausted and running on stubbornness alone. She pointed to the table with her flour-dusted hand. Sit. For once, he didn't argue. He sank into the chair like his strings had been cut, and Eliza could see the toll the night had taken. This man who seemed carved from stone was human after all, vulnerable beneath the armor he wore. She brought him coffee and a plate of leftover cornbread, watching as he ate mechanically, fueling himself without tasting. When he reached for the coffee with his bandaged hand and winced, she took the cup and held it to his lips herself. I can manage, he protested. I know you can. Let me do this anyway. He drank, his eyes on hers, and in them she saw exhaustion and fear and stubborn determination all tangled together. When he finished, she set the cup down and sat across from him. Tell me the truth, she said. How bad is this? Not what you tell the men, what you actually think. Cole was quiet for a long moment, and she watched him wrestle with whether to be honest or protective. Finally, he chose honesty. It's bad. The barn alone is a major loss. We needed it for winter storage, for equipment, for shelter during storms. Rebuilding will take every spare dollar we have, which means no buffer for emergencies. And that's assuming Marcus stops here, which he won't. He rubbed his face with his forearm, careful of his hands. He's testing us, seeing how we respond. If we fold, he wins. If we fight back wrong, he uses it against us. We're walking a razor's edge. What does he actually want? Just the land? The water rights primarily. My property includes 2 natural springs and creek access that doesn't dry up even in drought years. With those, he could double his herd size. Without them, he's limited by his own land's capacity. Cole's jaw tightened. He offered me a fair price once, years ago. I turned him down. Since then, he's decided if he can't buy it, he'll take it. How? Legally, I mean. If I can't pay my debts or meet my obligations, the bank forecloses. Marcus has connections there. He could buy up my note and foreclose himself. Or he could make operating here so difficult and dangerous that I have no choice but to sell cheap just to escape. His pale eyes met hers. Or he could kill me and buy it from whatever relative inherits, which would be a distant cousin in Missouri who's never seen this place and wouldn't hesitate to sell. The casual way he said kill me made Eliza's blood run cold. That's murder. It's the frontier. Accidents happen. Men die all the time, thrown from horses, caught in stampedes, shot by drifters. If Marcus is careful, no one could prove it wasn't just bad luck. We won't let it get that far. I know, but I need you to understand what we're facing. This isn't just a business dispute. It's a fight for survival, and Marcus plays for keeps. He reached across the table with his bandaged hand, and she took it gently. Which is why I need you to promise me something. What? If something happens to me, if Marcus makes a move and succeeds, you take what money's in the safe and you leave. Immediately. Don't try to stay. Don't try to fight him alone. Just go. No. Eliza, no, she repeated, her voice hard as iron. I'm not promising that. If something happens to you, I'll decide then what I'm going to do. But I won't make a promise to abandon everything we've built just because you're afraid for me. I am afraid for you. Terrified, actually. Good. Be terrified. But trust me to make my own choices. She squeezed his hand carefully. You told me we face things together. That means all things, including this. Cole looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him struggle between his protective instincts and his respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded. Together, he agreed quietly. Even when it scares me. Especially when it scares you. Arthur left for the territorial marshal's office later that morning, carrying a detailed written account of the fire and Marcus's threats. He'd be gone at least a week. 3 days there, time for the marshal to investigate, or at least file the report, 3 days back. In the meantime, they were down a man and vulnerable. The next several days passed in tense anticipation. The men worked on clearing the barn's remains and salvaging what could be saved. Some tools, a few pieces of tack that had been in the stone storage room, iron fittings that could be reused. Cole drew up plans for a new barn, calculating materials and costs with grim efficiency. Eliza kept the household running with mechanical precision, but her mind was always half on the horizon, watching for riders or signs of trouble. She'd taken to keeping Cole's rifle within reach in the kitchen, and at night she barely slept, startling awake at every sound. Cole noticed. One evening, after she'd jumped at the sound of wind rattling the shutters, he pulled her into his arms. You need to rest, he said. Really rest. You're running yourself into the ground. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that barn burning and you running into it. I see what could have happened, what still might happen. Hey. He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. I'm here. I'm alive. And I'm not going anywhere without a fight. That's what scares me. The fighting, the violence that's coming. I know. He kissed her forehead, a gesture of comfort rather than passion. But we've survived worse, both of us. We'll survive this too. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But belief was hard when the world kept proving that good things could be destroyed by men with money and malice. The attack came 5 days after the barn burned, and it was more insidious than fire. Eliza was in the garden at midday when she heard shouting from the direction of the creek. She ran toward the sound, her skirts hiked up, and found Thomas and Carson standing at the water's edge, staring at something in the stream. What is it? She called. Thomas turned to her, his face pale. Cattle. Dead. Upstream. Eliza's stomach dropped. She approached the creek and saw what they'd found, the water running slightly murky, and caught against the rocks downstream, the bloated corpse of a steer wearing Marcus Thornton's brand. Poisoned water, or at least water contaminated by a strategically placed dead animal. Get Cole, she said urgently, and don't let anyone drink from the creek until we figure out what we're dealing with. Cole arrived within minutes, his expression darkening as he assessed the situation. How long has it been there? Can't tell for sure, Carson said, but given the bloat, at least a day, maybe 2. Long enough for the contamination to reach us. Cole's hands clenched into fists, aggravating his healing burns. Everyone switches to well water immediately. Thomas, take 2 men and get that carcass out of the creek, downstream from our property, and make sure you're careful. We don't know if it died naturally or was poisoned deliberately. You think Marcus would poison his own cattle? Eliza asked. I think Marcus would do whatever it takes. One steer is nothing to him if it accomplishes his goal. Cole's jaw was tight with barely contained rage. And his goal is making this place uninhabitable. They spent the rest of the day managing the crisis. The well could provide enough water for the household and the men, but watering the horses and cattle from it would be impossible. The well couldn't support that much draw. They'd need the creek, which meant they had to ensure the contamination cleared. Cole sent riders downstream to check for more carcasses and upstream to find where this one had been placed. They found 2 more dead cattle above their property, all wearing Thornton's brand, all positioned to maximize water contamination. He's not even being subtle anymore, James said that evening as they gathered to discuss the situation. His leg had healed enough that he was back to full work, though he still limped when tired. This is deliberate sabotage. Which we still can't prove, Cole said bitterly. Marcus will claim his cattle wandered onto our property and died naturally. The territorial laws about water contamination are vague enough that he can argue ignorance. So we do nothing? Carson's frustration was evident in his voice. We document it, add it to the report Arthur's filing, and we adapt. Cole looked around at his men. We're going to have to haul water from the well to troughs for the livestock until the creek clears. It'll be hard work, but it's doable. The men nodded, grim but determined. That night, alone with Cole in his room, Eliza let her own frustration show. He's winning, she said, pacing the small space. He's destroying us piece by piece, and we're just taking it. We're surviving it, Cole corrected. There's a difference. For how long? How much can this ranch take before it breaks? As much as it needs to. He caught her hand as she paced past him, pulling her to stop. I know it feels like we're losing, but Marcus is making mistakes. He's escalating too quickly, being too obvious. Eventually he'll do something he can't explain away, and we'll have him. And if we don't survive long enough to see that happen, Cole pulled her down to sit beside him on the bed. Then we tried. We fought. We didn't just surrender. That's not good enough. It's all we have. Eliza wanted to argue, to rail against the injustice of it all, but she was too tired. She leaned against Cole's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and tried to find comfort in his presence. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Me too. You? I've never seen you scared of anything. That's because you've never been at stake before. He turned to face her, his pale eyes intense. I'm not afraid of losing the ranch. I built it once, I could build it again. I'm afraid of losing you. Of Marcus deciding you're a weak point he can exploit. Of coming back one day and finding out he's taken you from me the way he's trying to take everything else. The raw vulnerability in his voice undid her. This man who held everything so tightly controlled, who never let anyone see weakness, was showing her his deepest fear. I'm not going anywhere, she said fiercely. Marcus Thornton doesn't get to win. Not the ranch, not me, not us. We're stronger than he thinks. Are we? Yes, because we have something he doesn't understand. We have people who actually care about this place, about each other. His men work for money. Ours work for something more. She cupped his face in her hands. That makes us dangerous in ways he can't calculate. Cole kissed her then, and it was desperate and fierce and full of all the words they couldn't say. They clung to each other like drowning people, seeking comfort and connection in a world that seemed determined to tear them apart. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Eliza made a decision. We need to change tactics, she said. What do you mean? We've been reactive, waiting for Marcus to attack and then responding. We need to be proactive. Cole propped himself up on one elbow, wincing slightly from his healing burns. What did you have in mind? Information. Leverage. Something we can use against him. Her mind was racing now, pieces clicking into place. Marcus is rich and powerful, but rich and powerful men always have secrets, things they don't want exposed. We find those secrets, and suddenly we have something to negotiate with. That's dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous. At least this way we're taking action instead of just absorbing punishment. Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. You're talking about digging into his business, his connections, his history. Yes. That could backfire spectacularly. It could. But doing nothing guarantees we lose. At least this gives us a chance to win. She met his eyes in the darkness. I didn't survive losing everything once just to passively watch it happen again. I'm done being a victim, Cole. I'm ready to fight back. She saw the moment he made his decision, saw the shift in his expression from protective caution to grim determination. All right, he said, we fight back, but carefully and smart, and only when we're sure of what we're doing. Agreed. And Eliza, if this goes wrong, if Marcus figures out what we're doing and comes after you, then I'll handle it, she interrupted. Stop trying to protect me from consequences I'm choosing. I know what I'm risking. He pulled her close, his arms tight around her. You're the most terrifying woman I've ever met. Good. Maybe Marcus should be terrified too. Arthur returned a week later with news that was simultaneously hopeful and disappointing. The territorial marshal had filed the reports and promised to investigate, But he'd also made it clear that without concrete proof, his hands were tied. Marcus Thornton was a respected businessman with powerful friends. Accusations would need to be ironclad. He did say one thing that might help, Arthur told Cole and Eliza in the privacy of Cole's office. There have been other complaints about Marcus over the years, other small ranchers who claimed harassment and sabotage. None of them stuck because Marcus has good lawyers and better alibis. But the marshal said if we can document everything, dates, times, witnesses, damages, eventually there will be enough of a pattern that even Marcus's lawyers can't explain it away. So we wait and collect evidence while he destroys us, Cole said flatly. Or we find evidence that can't be explained away, Eliza said. Evidence that proves his pattern of behavior isn't just against us. Arthur looked between them, his weathered face thoughtful. You're planning something. Maybe, Cole admitted, but it's better if you don't know details. If things go wrong, I want you insulated. Boss, I've been with you 15 years. I'm not getting insulated now. Arthur, no. The old cowboy's voice was firm. You want to dig into Marcus's business? Fine. But you're going to need help. And I've got contacts Marcus doesn't know about, men who've worked for him over the years and left with grievances. Let me make some inquiries, quiet ones. Cole looked at Eliza, who nodded slightly. They needed allies in this, and Arthur was trustworthy. All right, Cole said, but carefully. If Marcus even suspects we're investigating him. He'll escalate, Arthur finished. I know. I'll be smart about it. Over the next 2 weeks, Arthur made trips to neighboring ranches and towns, ostensibly checking on supply prices and equipment, but actually gathering information. He returned with fragments of a disturbing picture. Marcus Thornton had driven at least 5 other ranchers out of business over the past decade using similar tactics: fire, contaminated water, legal harassment, physical intimidation. 2 of those ranchers had left the territory entirely. One had died in what was ruled an accidental shooting, but looked suspicious in hindsight. He's got a system, Arthur reported. Identifies properties he wants, makes an offer, and when it's refused, he systematically destroys them until they have no choice but to sell. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes years, but he always wins eventually. Not this time, Cole said with quiet intensity. There's more, Arthur continued. One of the ranchers he forced out, a man named William Chen, kept detailed records of everything Marcus did. Dates, times, witnesses. He tried to bring charges, but Marcus's lawyers buried him in legal fees until he gave up. But Chen still got those records, and he'd be willing to share them if it means taking Marcus down. Eliza felt hope spark in her chest. Where is he now? Denver. Runs a freight company. Successful, actually. Getting forced out of ranching turned out to be the best thing that happened to him, though he's still bitter about how it happened. Arthur pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I've got his address. He said he'd meet with us if we came to him. That's 3 days' ride, Cole said, his mind already calculating logistics. I can't leave the ranch that long, not with Marcus watching for weakness. I'll go, Eliza said immediately. Both men turned to stare at her. Absolutely not, Cole said. Why not? I can ride well enough. I'm not an asset Marcus would think to target if I'm traveling, and I can be diplomatic in a way that might make Chen more willing to cooperate. It's too dangerous. Everything is dangerous right now. At least this danger serves a purpose. She stepped closer to Cole, her voice firm. You need those records. They might be the key to everything, and you need to stay here to protect the ranch. So I go. I'll go with her, Arthur offered. 2 riders, moving fast, keeping to less traveled routes. We can be there and back in 8 days, 9 at most. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, to forbid it, to lock Eliza in the house until the danger passed. But she saw the moment he recognized the logic of her argument, and more importantly, recognized her right to make this choice. 8 days, he said finally. You stay together, you avoid Marcus's people, and if anything feels wrong, you abandon the mission and come straight back. Agreed, Eliza said. And Arthur? Cole's voice dropped to something dangerous. If anything happens to her, I hold you responsible. Nothing will happen to her, Arthur promised. You have my word. They left before dawn 2 days later, riding fast and light with minimal supplies. Eliza had traded her dress for men's trousers and a long shirt, borrowed from the bunkhouse and altered to fit, that would let her ride more easily and draw less attention. Her hair was braided and hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, and with dust on her face she could pass for a young man at a distance. Cole had held her the night before like he was memorizing the feel of her, his fear for her safety palpable in every touch. "Come back to me," he'd whispered against her hair. "Always," she'd promised. "I have too much to live for now." The ride to Denver was hard but uneventful. They pushed the horses during the day and camped rough at night, always choosing sites that offered good visibility and defensible positions. Arthur proved to be steady company, telling stories of his years on the frontier that helped pass the time and take Eliza's mind off her worry about what might be happening back at the ranch. They reached Denver on the third day, tired and dusty but intact. William Chen's freight office was in the warehouse district, a substantial operation that spoke of success. Chen himself was in his 40s, compact and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone who'd survived hard times and come out stronger. When Arthur explained why they'd come, his expression hardened with recognition. "Marcus Thornton," he said, the name bitter on his tongue. "I wondered when someone would finally stand up to him seriously." "Will you help us?" Eliza asked. Chen studied her, seeming to look past the trail dust and borrowed clothes to the determination underneath. "You know what you're risking. Marcus doesn't forgive people who oppose him, and he especially doesn't forgive people who cost him money or reputation." "I know, but he's trying to destroy something I love, and I won't let that happen without a fight." Something in her words seemed to resonate with Chen. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll give you copies of my records. Everything I documented about Marcus's tactics against me and the other ranchers I knew about. Dates, witnesses, financial records showing how he undercut prices to starve us out, legal filings, everything." He paused. "But understand, this isn't enough on its own. Marcus has too many connections, too much money. You'll need more than documentation. You'll need leverage that threatens him personally." "Like what?" Arthur asked. "Like proof of criminal activity the territorial authorities can't ignore, or evidence of business practices that would make his wealthy backers reconsider their investments." Chen pulled out a thick folder from his safe. "These records are a start, but if you really want to beat him, you need to find where he's vulnerable. And he is vulnerable. All men like him are. They build their power on secrets and exploitation, and secrets can be exposed." Eliza took the folder with shaking hands. It was heavier than she expected, full of years of pain and struggle. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning of your fight." Chen's expression was grim. "But since you're willing to have it, I'll tell you one more thing, something I learned after I left ranching and started dealing with freight. Marcus has been shipping large quantities of supplies to a property he owns near the territorial border. Construction materials, provisions, things that suggest he's building something substantial. And he's been doing it quietly, through intermediaries like he doesn't want anyone to know." "What kind of property?" Arthur asked. "No idea. But whatever it is, he's spending a fortune on it and keeping it secret. That seems like the kind of thing you'd want to know about." They left Denver the next morning with the records secured in Arthur's saddlebags and a new lead to investigate. The ride back was faster, both of them eager to return with what they'd learned. They were half a day from the ranch when they saw the smoke. Eliza's heart stopped at the sight of that dark plume rising against the afternoon sky, exactly where Blackwood Ranch should be. Without a word, she and Arthur kicked their horses into a full gallop, the animals sensing their rider's urgency and responding with everything they had left after days of hard travel. The miles disappeared in a blur of pounding hooves and rising panic. Eliza's mind raced through terrible possibilities. The house burning, the men injured or worse, Cole lying somewhere bleeding while Marcus's hired guns walked away laughing. Every second felt like an eternity, every breath like fire in her lungs. They crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view, and Eliza's terror transformed into confusion. The smoke wasn't coming from the house or any of the remaining buildings. It was rising from a massive bonfire in the center of the yard, and around it, the men were gathered, not fighting, not fleeing, but working with focused intensity. Cole stood near the fire, directing operations, very much alive and apparently unharmed. Relief hit Eliza so hard she nearly fell from her horse. They rode into the yard at a reckless speed, and Cole turned at the sound of hooves, his face transforming from concentration to pure relief when he saw Eliza. He was moving toward her before she'd even dismounted, and then his arms were around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You're all right," he said against her hair. "Thank God you're all right." "What happened?" "The smoke. We thought—" "Controlled burn," he said, pulling back to look at her face like he needed to confirm she was real. "We're burning diseased wood and contaminated supplies. Marcus tried something new while you were gone." Arthur had dismounted and was already talking to James, getting the full story. Eliza listened as Cole explained, his arms still wrapped around her waist like he couldn't bear to let go. 3 days after they'd left, Marcus's men had ridden onto the property in broad daylight, 6 of them, armed and bold as brass. They'd claimed to be territorial land surveyors checking boundary markers, but they'd trampled through the garden, let several head of cattle loose, and before leaving had left a stack of lumber near the equipment shed that they claimed was a goodwill gift to help with the barn rebuilding. "Except the lumber was infested," Cole said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Powder post beetles would have spread to every piece of wood on the property if we'd used it. Thomas caught it before we incorporated any into the new barn frame, but it was close." "So you're burning it," Eliza said. "Everything they touched, the lumber, supplies from the shed that might have been contaminated, even the garden soil where their horses stood. We're digging it out and replacing it. Can't take any chances." Eliza felt rage bubble up inside her, hot and clean. "He's escalating, getting bolder. Because he thinks we're weakening. He doesn't know what you found." Cole's eyes went to the saddlebags Arthur was carrying. "Did Chen come through?" "Better than we hoped," Arthur said, patting the bags. "We've got documentation going back a decade, plus a lead on something Marcus is building near the border, something he's keeping quiet." Cole's expression sharpened with predatory interest. "Tell me everything, but first—" He looked at Eliza, his hand coming up to cup her face. "I'm glad you're back. It was the longest 8 days of my life." "Mine too," she admitted. "But we got what we needed." They spent that evening in Cole's office, spreading Chen's records across every surface and piecing together the pattern of Marcus Thornton's empire. It was worse than they'd imagined, not just harassment and sabotage, but a calculated system of acquisition and exploitation that had destroyed more than a dozen small operations over the years. "He's been building a monopoly," Thomas said, studying one of the financial documents. "Every ranch he takes control of, he absorbs into his operation. He's not just the biggest rancher in the territory anymore. He's becoming the only rancher who matters. Everyone else either works for him or gets driven out." "Which means he has to keep expanding," Eliza said, understanding dawning. "If he stops, if people realize the pattern, his whole empire becomes vulnerable. He needs to keep winning to maintain the appearance of inevitability." "Exactly," Cole said. "Which is why he can't afford to lose to us. We're not just another ranch to him anymore. We're a threat to the entire system he's built." "So what do we do with this, James asked, gesturing to the records. "Marshall said we needed documentation. We've got it now." "It's still not enough," Arthur said grimly. "Everything here could be explained away by good lawyers. We need something that can't be explained, something that proves criminal intent." "The property near the border," Eliza said. "Chen said Marcus was building something there in secret. What if it's not legitimate? What if it's something that would implicate him in activities the territorial authorities couldn't ignore?" Cole met her eyes across the desk, and she saw his mind working through possibilities. "You think he's involved in something beyond land acquisition. I think men who operate in the shadows usually have more than one shadow to hide in, and I think we need to find out what he's building before he completes it." "That's a day's hard ride to the border," Thomas said. "Through territory Marcus knows better than we do." "Then we go carefully," Cole said. "Small group, good riders, ready to retreat if necessary. We scout the property, document what we find, and get out clean." "When?" Arthur asked. Cole looked at Eliza, and she read the question in his eyes. Was she ready for this, after just returning from one dangerous trip? "Tomorrow," she said firmly, "before Marcus makes another move against us here." "Eliza, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. I'm part of this now, all the way. And you need someone who can document what we find in writing. My handwriting's better than any of yours." Cole wanted to argue. She could see it in every line of his body, but he also respected her enough not to try to protect her from choices she was making with full knowledge of the risks. "All right," he said finally. "Me, Eliza, Arthur, and Thomas. We leave at dawn. The rest of you hold the ranch and watch for trouble. If Marcus's men show up while we're gone, don't engage. Just document everything and stay safe." The men nodded and dispersed to prepare, leaving Cole and Eliza alone in the office, surrounded by evidence of Marcus Thornton's crimes. "This is dangerous," Cole said quietly, once they were alone. "More dangerous than Denver. If Marcus has guards at this property, if he figures out what we're doing—" "I know." Eliza moved to stand in front of him, her hands on his chest. "But this is how we win, Cole. We've been playing defense since this started, and it's nearly destroyed us. This is our chance to go on offense." "I can't lose you," he said, and the rawness in his voice made her chest ache. "I survived alone for years thinking that was enough. And then you walked onto this ranch and changed everything. Made me remember what it felt like to care about something beyond just surviving. If Marcus takes you from me, he won't." She pulled him down into a kiss, fierce and desperate. "We're going to win this, Cole. Together. And then we're going to build something better than either of us could have imagined. Promise me." "I promise." They held each other in the lamplight, two scarred souls who'd found unexpected belonging, drawing strength from each other for the battle ahead. They rode out at dawn, 4 riders moving fast through country that grew increasingly rugged as they approached the territorial border. Cole pushed them hard, wanting to reach Marcus's mysterious property in daylight, when they'd have the advantage of visibility. By mid-afternoon, they were in wild territory, rocky hills and dense scrub, the kind of land that was cheap because it was nearly useless for grazing. The perfect place to hide something you didn't want found. Thomas, who'd been reading the crude map Chen had provided, pointed toward a narrow canyon. "Should be through there." Chen's note said to look for a canyon with a lightning-struck pine at the entrance. They found the tree, a massive dead pine split down the middle by some ancient storm, and dismounted to proceed on foot. Cole led the way, his rifle ready, every sense alert for guards or traps. The canyon opened into a hidden valley, and what they found there made them all stop in shock. It was a processing facility, elaborate and clearly expensive, with multiple buildings and what looked like smelting equipment. Ore carts sat on tracks leading into a mine shaft cut into the canyon wall, and stacked near the largest building were bars of refined metal that gleamed dully in the afternoon light. "Silver," Arthur breathed. "He's mining silver on territorial land without a legal claim." "That's a federal crime," Thomas added, "stealing mineral rights from public land. The territorial marshal might have ignored harassment complaints. But this? This is something the federal authorities have to act on." Eliza was already pulling out paper and pencil, sketching the layout and writing detailed descriptions. "How much do you think he's pulled out of here?" "Judging by the size of the operation, thousands of dollars worth, maybe tens of thousands." Cole was studying the facility with a tactical eye. "No guards that I can see, but there's fresh tracks, wagons, horses. This place is active." "Then we need to document fast and get out before someone shows up," Arthur said. They split up, each taking a section to document. Eliza sketched the main buildings and counted the ore carts while making notes about the equipment she could see. Thomas examined the smelting operation and found ledgers in one of the buildings, records of production that Marcus had been stupid enough or arrogant enough to keep on site. Arthur photographed the marked silver bars using a small camera he'd brought, creating physical evidence that couldn't be dismissed as hearsay. Cole stood watch, his rifle ready, every nerve screaming that they were pressing their luck. They'd been there maybe 30 minutes when he heard it. The sound of approaching horses, multiple riders coming fast up the canyon. "We've got company," he called quietly. "Move, now!" They abandoned stealth for speed, grabbing what evidence they could and running for their horses. Behind them, shouts echoed through the canyon as Marcus's men discovered intruders. "Ride!" Cole commanded, and they were galloping back the way they'd come, the thunder of pursuit close behind. Eliza had never ridden so hard in her life. The horse beneath her was running flat out, its sides heaving, and she leaned low over its neck, urging it faster. Gunshots cracked behind them. Warning shots, she hoped, not actual attempts to kill, but she couldn't be sure. They hit the main trail and turned toward home, but their pursuers were gaining. 4 riders fleeing, 6 or 7 giving chase, and the horses were already tired from the long ride out. "We're not going to make it," Thomas shouted over the pounding hooves. "Split up," Cole commanded. "Arthur, Thomas, you two go east. Lead them away. We'll go west and circle back to the ranch. Meet there when you've lost them." "Boss, that's an order. Go!" Arthur and Thomas peeled off, and half the pursuers followed them. That left 3 men chasing Cole and Eliza, still too many but better odds. They rode through increasingly rough country, Cole choosing paths that would slow pursuit but were risky at their speed. Eliza's arms ached from gripping the reins, her thighs burned from holding her seat, but terror kept her focused. A ravine appeared ahead, narrow but jumpable if they committed. Cole took it without hesitation, his horse clearing the gap with inches to spare. Eliza followed, her heart in her throat, and felt her horse gather and leap. They landed hard on the other side, the horse stumbling but catching itself. Behind them, she heard a horse scream and a man cursing as at least one of their pursuers failed to make the jump. But 2 were still coming, determined and angry. Cole led them into dense scrub where the horses had to slow to navigate, then suddenly pulled up in a clearing and wheeled his mount around, rifle up. "Get behind me," he told Eliza. "Cole, now!" She positioned her horse behind his just as their pursuers crashed into the clearing. They pulled up short, seeing Cole's rifle aimed and steady. "That's far enough," Cole said, his voice deadly calm. "You'll notice I've got the high ground and my rifle's already aimed. You boys want to try your luck? Go ahead, but I guarantee I drop at least one of you before you clear leather." The men hesitated, hands hovering near their weapons but not drawing. They were hired muscle, not suicidal. "Marcus Thornton's going to hear about this," one of them said. "You just made a big mistake, Braddock." "No, Marcus made this big mistake. He's been mining silver on federal land without a claim. That's a federal crime, and we've got documentation that'll bury him." Cole's smile was sharp as a knife. "So you ride back and tell Marcus that his empire is about to come crashing down. And tell him if he sends anyone else after me or mine, they won't get a warning. They'll get bullets." The men exchanged glances, clearly calculating whether their pay was worth dying for. Apparently deciding it wasn't, they turned their horses and rode back the way they'd come, though their posture suggested this wasn't over. Cole kept his rifle up until they were out of sight, then lowered it with a shaking hand. "You all right?" he asked Eliza. Terrified but alive. She was shaking too, the adrenaline starting to fade and leave her weak. "Did we actually just threaten Marcus Thornton's men?" "Yes, which means things are about to get very complicated very fast." Cole holstered his rifle and moved his horse closer to hers, reaching out to take her hand. "But we have what we needed. Evidence of federal crimes. That changes everything." They rode toward the ranch at a more cautious pace, taking a circuitous route in case more of Marcus's men were searching. It was full dark by the time they arrived home, and they found Arthur and Thomas already there, having successfully evaded their pursuers. The men gathered in Cole's office again, this time with the evidence spread out alongside Chen's records. The ledgers from the mine, Eliza's detailed sketches, Arthur's photographs, Thomas's notes on the smelting operation. Together, it painted a damning picture. "We need to get this to the federal marshal," Cole said. "Not the territorial one. He's too close to Marcus. We need someone from the capital who has jurisdiction over federal land claims." "That's a week's travel to Santa Fe," Arthur said. "And Marcus will be expecting us to try something like this now that his men know we found the mine." "Then we don't all go." Cole looked at Eliza. "You and I ride to Santa Fe. We're less conspicuous as a couple traveling together than a group of ranch hands. Arthur and Thomas hold the ranch with the men and watch for Marcus's response." "He's going to retaliate," Thomas said quietly. "When he figures out where you've gone and why, he's going to hit the ranch hard." "I know." Cole's jaw tightened. "Which is why you're all authorized to defend yourselves with lethal force if necessary. Don't start a fight, but if Marcus brings one to you, end it. I'll leave written instructions making it clear any action you take is under my orders." The men nodded grimly. They all knew what was being asked of them. Hold the line while Cole and Eliza struck the killing blow against Marcus's empire. "When do we leave?" Eliza asked. "First light. We pack light, ride fast, and we don't stop for anything." Cole looked at her with those winter sky eyes full of determination and fear. "This is it, Eliza. We're gambling everything on this trip. If we don't make it, if the federal marshal won't act, if Marcus catches us on the way, then we'll have tried everything we could," she finished, "and we'll face whatever comes together." They spent that night preparing for departure and saying quiet goodbyes to men who'd become family. James gripped Eliza's hand with fierce emotion, still limping slightly on his healed leg. "You saved my life, ma'am. Whatever happens, I won't forget that." "You saved the ranch," she told him. "That's how you repay me." Arthur pulled Cole aside for a long conversation Eliza couldn't hear, but she saw the old cowboy grip Cole's shoulder with something like a father's blessing. These men had built something together that went beyond employment, beyond business. They'd built trust, and that was worth fighting for. Cole and Eliza lay together that night in his room, holding each other in silence. There was too much to say and no words adequate for the moment. "If something goes wrong," Cole started, "nothing will go wrong. But if it does," Eliza put her fingers over his lips, "then we'll face it when it happens. Right now, in this moment, we're together and alive and fighting for something that matters. That's enough." He kissed her fingers, then pulled her close. "I love you," he said, the words raw and unpracticed, like they'd been locked behind his walls for so long he'd forgotten how to say them. "I should have said it sooner, but I love you. You changed my life, Eliza Warren, made me believe in something beyond just survival." Her eyes burned with tears. "I love you too. You gave me a home when I had nothing, gave me purpose, gave me a reason to be strong again instead of just enduring." They made love with desperate tenderness, memorizing each other's bodies like maps they might need to navigate in darkness. And when they finally slept, it was tangled together, drawing comfort from shared warmth and the solid reality of each other's presence. Dawn came too soon and not soon enough. They dressed in silence, packed the evidence carefully in waterproof oilcloth, and prepared for the journey. The men were already up, seeing them off with grave faces and clasped hands. "Keep the ranch safe," Cole told them. "That's all I ask." "We will, boss," Arthur promised. "You just make sure that bastard pays for what he's done." They rode out as the sun painted the eastern horizon gold and red, two figures heading toward an uncertain future but facing it together. The miles passed in focused silence as they pushed the horses hard, aware that every hour mattered. Marcus would realize where they were going eventually, and when he did, he'd try to stop them. They camped rough the first 2 nights, never lighting fires, always choosing defensive positions where they could see anyone approaching. The constant vigilance was exhausting, but neither complained. This was what survival looked like at its sharpest edge. On the 3rd day, riders appeared behind them, 4 men moving with purpose, closing the distance steadily. Marcus's men, sent to intercept them. "How far to Santa Fe?" Eliza asked, her heart racing. "Half a day if we push hard." Cole studied the pursuers, calculating distances and speeds. "They'll catch us before that if we try to outrun them straight through. We need to slow them down." "How?" His smile was grim. "Trust me?" "With my life." He led them off the main trail and into rocky terrain, then up a narrow pass that climbed steeply. The pursuers followed, but the difficult ground slowed everyone. Near the top, Cole dismounted and pulled his rifle. "Keep going," he told Eliza. "When you hear shooting, ride like hell for Santa Fe. Don't stop, don't look back. Get to the federal marshal and give him everything. I'm not leaving you." "You have to. If we both stay, they'll kill us both or capture us both. If you go, at least the evidence gets through." He grabbed her face, kissed her hard. "I'll hold them here as long as I can, then circle around and meet you in Santa Fe, but you have to go now." "Cole, I love you. Now ride." He slapped her horse's flank, sending it leaping forward, and Eliza had no choice but to hang on as the animal climbed the pass and crested the ridge. Behind her, gunfire erupted, single shots, carefully placed, Cole using the high ground to his advantage. She rode with tears streaming down her face, hating herself for leaving him, but knowing he was right. The evidence had to get through. Everything they'd fought for depended on it. The miles to Santa Fe passed in a blur of desperate flight. She pushed her horse mercilessly, stopping only briefly to let it breathe before pushing on. The sun was setting when the territorial capital finally appeared on the horizon, and she urged her exhausted mount toward it with the last of both their strength. The federal marshal's office was near the central plaza, a substantial building that represented order and law in a lawless territory. Eliza half fell from her horse and stumbled inside, the evidence clutched in her arms. "I need to see the federal marshal," she gasped to the clerk at the desk. "It's urgent. Criminal activity on federal land." The clerk took in her disheveled appearance, trail-worn, exhausted, wild-eyed, and seemed to assess whether she was serious or hysterical. "The marshal's in a meeting, ma'am. If you'd like to leave a report—" "This can't wait." Eliza slammed the evidence on the desk. "Marcus Thornton has been mining silver on federal land without a claim. These are production records from his illegal operation, photographs, witness testimony, and documentation of a pattern of criminal behavior going back a decade. If your marshal won't see me immediately, I'll go to the territorial governor's office and explain why federal law enforcement was too busy for meetings to stop a major theft of federal resources." The clerk's eyes widened. He disappeared into the back office, and moments later a tall man in his 50s emerged, his badge marking him as Federal Marshal Robert Hayes. "You're making serious accusations," he said, his voice measured. "I hope you can back them up." "I can." Eliza opened the oilcloth and spread the evidence across his desk. Chen's records, the photographs, the ledgers, her sketches, everything they'd risked their lives to gather. Marcus Thornton owns the largest ranch operation in this territory. He's been systematically destroying smaller ranchers who won't sell to him, using arson, sabotage, contamination, and intimidation. That's criminal but hard to prove definitively. But this, she pointed to the mine documents, this is federal theft. He's been running an illegal mining operation on public land, extracting thousands of dollars in silver without filing claims or paying federal taxes. You can verify everything here: the location, the production records, the refined silver bars bearing his mark. Marshal Hayes examined the evidence with growing intensity, his expression hardening as he absorbed the scope of what they'd documented. "Where's the mine located?" "Near the southern border, in the Canyon territories. I can give you exact coordinates." Eliza pulled out her sketch showing the approach and landmarks. "He has guards there, armed men who tried to kill us when we discovered it." "Us?" Hayes looked up sharply. "Me and Cole Braddock, the rancher Marcus is trying to destroy. Cole held off Marcus's men so I could get here with the evidence. He was supposed to follow, but..." Her voice broke. "He might be dead. He might have died so this evidence could reach you." Something in her raw emotion seemed to convince the marshal more than any amount of documentation could. This wasn't some calculated political maneuver. This was desperation, real and absolute. "Wait here," he said, gathering up the most damning documents. "I need to consult with my deputies and prepare a federal warrant. If everything you've shown me checks out, and it appears to, we'll be riding to arrest Marcus Thornton and seize his illegal operation within the hour." "Thank you," Eliza whispered. Hayes paused at the door. "And ma'am, if your Cole Braddock is half as brave as you are, I suspect he'll make it here just fine." But the hours passed with no sign of Cole, and Eliza's hope began to fray. She waited in the marshal's office while deputies rode out to verify the mine's location, while federal warrants were drawn up, while the machinery of justice ground slowly forward. Night fell. Then midnight. Then the cold hours before dawn when hope seemed most fragile. And then, just as the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, a horse stumbled into the plaza and its rider half fell from the saddle. Eliza was outside before she consciously decided to move, running toward the figure, her heart in her throat. "Cole!" He looked up at her voice, his face bloody and exhausted, and managed a pained smile. "Did you make it? Did you get to Hayes?" Yes, I made it." She reached him just as his knees buckled, catching him and lowering him to the ground. He'd been shot. She could see blood soaking his shirt, but he was alive, conscious, here. "You're hurt. Just a graze. Looks worse than it is." He gripped her hand with desperate strength. "The evidence?" "With the federal marshal. He's preparing warrants to arrest Marcus and seize the mine. You did it, Cole. We did it." Relief washed over his face, so profound it was almost painful to witness. Then it was worth it. All of it. "You're not dying on me," she said fiercely, even as her hands pressed against his wound to slow the bleeding. "Not after everything we've been through. You hear me?" "Wasn't planning on it." His smile was weak but real. "Told you I'd meet you here." Marshal Hayes emerged from his office with a doctor in tow, and they worked to stabilize Cole while Eliza held his hand and refused to let go. The bullet had indeed grazed him, painful and bleeding heavily, but not life-threatening. The doctor bandaged him up with professional efficiency while explaining how lucky Cole had been. 3 inches left and it would have hit your lung, the doctor said. "You've got someone looking out for you." "Yeah," Cole said, his eyes on Eliza. "I do." By mid-morning, the federal marshals rode out with a full complement of deputies, armed with warrants and authority that Marcus Thornton's money and connections couldn't circumvent. Cole and Eliza stayed in Santa Fe to recover and provide additional testimony, but they received regular updates as the situation unfolded. Marcus had tried to destroy evidence when he realized the Federals were coming, but he'd been too slow. They'd caught him at the mine site with silver bars in mid-transport, production ledgers still on the premises, and enough physical evidence to prove systematic theft of federal resources. His hired men had scattered or surrendered, and Marcus himself had been arrested and taken to the federal facility to await trial. The scope of his illegal activities stunned even the marshals who'd seen plenty of frontier criminality. The mine had produced over $50,000 in silver over 2 years, a fortune, all stolen from federal land. Combined with Chen's documentation of his pattern of criminal behavior, Marcus faced charges that would put him away for decades, even if his expensive lawyers managed to mitigate some of them. More importantly, his empire had collapsed. Without Marcus's ruthless management and constant pressure, the system he'd built began to fall apart. Ranchers he'd driven out started returning, filing their own complaints and lawsuits. His business partners distanced themselves to avoid contamination. His political connections evaporated as officials realized association with him was now career poison. The territorial newspapers ran sensational stories about the wealthy rancher who'd been systematically breaking federal law while presenting himself as a pillar of the community. Public opinion turned decisively against him. Within 3 weeks, Marcus Thornton went from being one of the most powerful men in the territory to a cautionary tale about greed and hubris. Cole and Eliza received word from Arthur that the ranch was safe. Marcus's men had scattered once news of his arrest spread, and there had been no further attacks. The men had started clearing ground for the new barn, confident now that they'd have the time and security to complete it. "We should go home," Cole said one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony watching the Santa Fe sunset. His wound was healing well, and restless energy had replaced the pain. "The ranch needs us." "Home," Eliza repeated, testing the word. It still felt miraculous, having a place that deserved that name. "Yes, let's go home." They rode back together, this time without fear of pursuit, and arrived at Blackwood Ranch to a welcome that made Eliza's throat tight with emotion. The men had lined up to greet them, Arthur in the front with a grin splitting his weathered face. "You did it, boss," he said, gripping Cole's hand. "The whole territory's talking about how you brought down Marcus Thornton." "We did it," Cole corrected, his arm around Eliza. "All of us. Everyone who stayed, who fought, who believed this place was worth defending." James approached Eliza with something like awe. "Ma'am, there's stories about you riding through the night to reach the marshal while armed men chased you. They're saying you're the bravest woman in the territory." "I'm not brave," she said. "I just knew what mattered and refused to lose it." But she was smiling, and when Cole squeezed her shoulder, she felt the truth of what they'd accomplished settle into her bones. They'd fought for this place, for each other, for the right to build something good in a harsh world. And they'd won. The next months passed in a blur of reconstruction and renewal. The new barn went up quickly, with all hands working together, larger and sturdier than the old one. The garden flourished under Eliza's care, producing more than enough for the ranch with surplus to sell in town. New hands joined the operation, drawn by stories of the ranch that had stood up to Marcus Thornton and won. The territorial court awarded Cole damages from Marcus's seized assets, enough to not only cover the losses from the attacks, but to invest in improvements, better equipment, more livestock, even a small addition to the house that would serve as a proper office and library. Eliza used some of the money to buy books, real books that she arranged on new shelves with something like reverence. Cole watched her organize them one evening, his expression soft. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I was half dead before you arrived," he said. "Just going through the motions, surviving but not living. And now look at this place. Look at us." She crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "We built something good. We built something extraordinary." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "Marry me." The words hung between them, simple and enormous all at once. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in the ranch yard on a bright autumn day with all the hands in attendance and Arthur serving as witness. It was a simple ceremony, no church or fancy trappings, just two people who'd found each other against all odds making promises they intended to keep. "I take you as you are," Cole said, holding her hands in his scarred ones, "stubborn and strong and brave beyond measure. Everything I am, everything I have, is yours." "I take you as you are," Eliza replied, her voice steady despite her emotion. "Fierce and loyal and honest to your core. Everything I am, everything I hope to be, is built on what we've made together." They kissed as husband and wife, and the men cheered, and for that perfect moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The ranch thrived over the following years, becoming known throughout the territory not just for the quality of its cattle, but for the way it was run. Fairly, honestly, with respect for the people who worked it. Other ranchers started copying their methods, treating their hands better, investing in their operations rather than just extracting value. Eliza became something of a legend herself, the woman who'd saved a young hand's life with frontier surgery, who'd ridden through the night to bring down a corrupt empire, who'd transformed a failing ranch into a model of what frontier life could be. People came from surrounding areas just to meet her, and she welcomed them with the same practical hospitality she'd always shown. She and Cole built additions to the house as their family grew, 2 children, a boy and a girl, who grew up running wild on the prairie with the ranch hands teaching them to ride, and Eliza teaching them to read from the growing library. The children never knew the hunger and fear their parents had survived, never understood what it meant to have nowhere to go and nothing to lose. That was intentional. Cole and Eliza had fought so their children wouldn't have to. But they told the children the story anyway, when they were old enough to understand, about the widow who arrived with nothing but a battered trunk and desperate hope, about the rancher who'd forgotten what it meant to trust or care, about how they'd found each other in a place as harsh as the land itself and built something that transformed not just themselves, but everyone around them. "The frontier tried to break us," Eliza would tell them, usually on winter evenings when the family gathered around the fire. "It broke a lot of people, but it didn't break us because we refused to break alone. We held each other up when falling seemed inevitable, and we fought for something bigger than just survival." "What did you fight for?" her daughter would ask, even though she'd heard the answer 100 times. "For home," Eliza would say, looking at Cole across the room, still finding wonder in the fact that this strong, complicated man was hers and she was his. "For belonging. For the right to build something good in a world that tried to convince us good things weren't possible." Years later, after the territory became a state and the frontier gave way to settlement, historians would write about the transformation of the Western territories. They'd document the land rushes and cattle drives, the legal battles and political maneuvering. Some would mention the fall of Marcus Thornton as an example of frontier justice prevailing over corruption. But the real story, the one that mattered, wasn't in the history books. It was in the ranch that still stood, prosperous and strong, run by children who'd inherited their parents' determination and integrity. It was in the community that had grown up around Blackwood Ranch, built on principles of fairness and mutual support that Eliza and Cole had modeled. It was in the way people in the territory still told the story of the widow and the rancher who'd refused to be broken, who'd fought back against impossible odds and won, who'd proven that strength wasn't about being alone and invulnerable. It was about finding people worth fighting for and refusing to let them go. On warm summer evenings, when the work was done and the prairie wind sang through the grass, Cole and Eliza would sit on the porch they'd built together and watch the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Sometimes they'd talk, sharing thoughts and plans and memories. Sometimes they'd sit in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after years of sharing a life. And sometimes Cole would take her hand, scarred from years of ranch work, and say what he'd said 1,000 times and would say 1,000 more. "Thank you for staying." And Eliza would smile, squeezing his hand in return, and give the answer that was always true. "Thank you for giving me a reason to." They'd come from nothing, both of them, broken by loss, hardened by survival, convinced they'd never find anything softer than endurance. But they'd found each other instead, and in finding each other, they'd found everything else that mattered. Home, purpose, belonging. Love fierce enough to weather any storm. The frontier had tried to break them. It had thrown fire and violence and desperate odds against two people who refused to surrender. And in the end, it hadn't broken them at all. It had forged them into something stronger than either could have been alone. A partnership built on honesty and respect, a love earned through shared struggle, a life that proved survival wasn't enough. You had to fight for more. You had to believe that more was possible. And when you found people who believed the same thing, who'd stand beside you when everything else fell apart, who'd see your scars and stubborn strength and choose you anyway, that's when you knew you'd found something worth any cost, any risk, any sacrifice. That's when you knew you'd found home.